now. Yeah, my name is Paul Collins. I'm the CEO of STEGH and happy to be here. Just a bit on a personal story relating to this. Around the time that the Flo Collaborative was first announced, my family learned that my father-in-law had passed away. My mother-in-law subsequently, he was more or less the primary caregiver for her. Her health had been deteriorating. Subsequently, within about a month and a half, she had an acute episode, had to be admitted to a hospital, not in our limb, in another limb. And once the acute phase of her problem was over, of course, she couldn't be sent back home again. There was really no resources to be able to deal with that. We couldn't get her into long-term care. So she lingered in the kind of ALC section of the hospital while we attempted to cope with that issue and try and find her some sort of placement outside. And both of us being in healthcare felt that this was not going to be a problem, that this would right itself over a period of time. Well, this went on. By this point in time, the Flo Collaborative was well down the path. This particular problem with my mother-in-law was also starting to right itself in that we were starting to get some sense that maybe she would be discharged. At this point in ALC, as an ALC, she was not getting sort of rehab and the kind of attention. I mean, that's not what acute hospitals are set up to do in this case. As a result, she fell out of bed and broke her hip. Now she ended up, this is after a few months, now she ended up on the acute side of the hospital again, having had surgery, had excellent care, received some appropriate rehab to the degree that she could not be placed again, found herself back in the ALC section of the hospital where nursing staff and others were simply coping with that reality, as were we. And this went on and on and on, and finally, after about a year, around the time that the Flo Collaborative was nearing its end, she was placed in long-term care. And quite frankly, by that point, she had deteriorated significantly. So the quality of life really wasn't there. So I think many of you in this audience probably have a similar personal experience, or at least know of an experience like this. So, the importance of this collaborative idea in our system, I think, has a lot of benefit. And at STGH, I think we've benefited from that experience. This is called the voice of experience in capitals. I think it should be the voice of an experience in lowercase letters, because we learned some things and there's still a long way to go. If I can just flip to do I have to do that? Okay. So this is our vision, mission, values. I don't think it's terribly different than yours. And one of the reasons I want that it's up here is because last winter, our board spent some time revisiting mission, vision, values, readjusting all of this stuff. And part of the reason for that was the information that they had gained in their involvement in this collaborative. So they're focusing very much now on, you notice, to deliver an excellent patient care experience. The idea that outcome isn't always something we can necessarily control, but we can have some measure of effect on the experience the patient has when they're in our care, and certainly from a system perspective to the degree that we collaborate with others. If I can just flip the next slide. So this is some of the observations from the leadership role that I have in the hospital. Firstly, the experience was really important because of its focus on patient need. We shouldn't be undertaking any of these kinds of expensive, quite frankly, ventures that aren't focused on improving the patient experience. This is not about making things easier for providers. In fact, in some cases, it might be a little difficult for providers because we have to change, unfortunately, to make things better for patients. So I think the idea that the collaborative used this double entendre of flow about the patient movement through the system, but also identifying somebody in particular who this was benefiting is absolutely key and certainly important to me. The notion of it generating teamwork inside and out, you're really focusing on the concept of team, helping to generate that team internally, but also our relationship with CCAC, which I think had always been good, but the involvement in the Flo Collaborative really created a much better path for that teamwork to work through. Much more focused, especially around our learning opportunities in terms of quality improvement. Communication, of course, amongst the team and with the CCAC was particularly enhanced, and I think people have spoken about the communication word this morning. CEO visibility. There was somebody made a comment this morning about the CEO didn't want to show up because they weren't sure that they were going to be welcome, and the people on the floor were saying, "Where the hell's the CEO and why aren't they here?" That happens a lot. I would certainly suggest to any of you in conversations with your CEOs, the more sometimes it's not because CEOs don't want to be out there in these meetings. It's often because they're not sure what their role is when they get there, and sometimes they worry a little bit that people wonder, what the heck are you doing here? Like, what trouble have we gotten ourselves into this time? I think it's very important that there be that kind of flow of communication, but it certainly helped me to be able to be invited to events, to be able to go to those events, to be able to be a part of the leadership sessions that the Flo Collaborative had set up. And this is where the board visibility became very important, because those 4 sessions, of course, that I was at, we had a number of different board members who attended those sessions and found them very, very informative and very helpful, to the point where they were quite welcoming on a regular basis of having members of the team in the hospital, as well as CCAC, come to board meetings to present the progress on the development of the project, which I think certainly was a benefit for them, because they were able to hear from the sort of front line what was going on. But I think as well benefited the team, because they were able to see that there was some very high level support for what they were doing. Of course, the spread of improvement methodology, I think a lot of us have been at this improvement game for a long, long time. And it was good to see something that was coming from a provincial level, from a LHIN level, that was very supportive of this idea that you can definitely hope that improvement might happen when you do some things, but there needs to be some method around that. And we need to collectively learn what that method is and apply it in a very rigorous way. And I think that was something that the Flo experience helped us to articulate better and move forward in our culture. This also helped us to introduce the concepts of lean into the organization. Lean, of course, is has a very highly philosophical nature to it when you look at Toyota. Regardless of the suffering that they're going through right at the moment, I'm sure they'll come out of it. But the idea that lean is a particular type of improvement methodology that can really benefit healthcare systems, and hospitals in particular, became a sort of a focus point for us that was generated to some degree by the work that we had already done in the Flo Collaborative, the Kaizen events that were held. There was some language suddenly that hadn't been used before that was now being used, that we could start to point at our own experience and say, yeah, that was a lean process that we went through, and start to migrate that a little further into our leadership culture, into to specific projects like the operating room and housekeeping. And then finally, at the end of the day, there were some very positive outcomes through measurement. As Don Berwick likes to say, not all improvement leads to change, but not all improvement requires change, but all change leads to, you know what I'm trying to say. He makes it very articulate. I'm not nearly as articulate as he is. But not everything that you do that you think is going to be improvement is a change. You have to measure it to be sure that there's an outcome that's beneficial. And I think in our case, we were able to show that in some areas, and that was quite helpful. So from a leadership experience and from a culture perspective in the organization, it really helped to advance us.